Hi, and welcome to My Words, Our Journey, the podcast. My name is Monty. I'm your host. Today we're on episode 7 of season 5, Defender of Children 2. There's a good chance that today will be our last episode of this journey. We'll just have to see as we go through. But let's start with chapter 30. Enjoy. It was 3 days after the attack at the hospital that the killer sat in the late model sedan, watching from across the street. From his vantage point, he could see the front main entrance as well as the north exit. If they happened to use the south or the west, they would still have to leave through the front, since there was only one way in and out of the hospital parking lot and garage. He was there out of curiosity, but he also did not want to miss an opportunity if one presented itself as they moved from one safe place to another. It was not expected, but he would not want to be questioned or second-guessed after the fact. Since this ordeal had begun, those he chose to partner with had sat on the sidelines, critiquing, showing their displeasure, but not willing to offer support, suggestions, or heaven forbid, get their hands dirty by helping in the assault. Now, their place was on the bleachers watching from afar at this point. If he was honest, he did find the whole thing both insulting and demeaning. That he was the only one of the 6 that still had been tasked with cleaning up the mess. Everyone else faded away, but each knew without his success the house of cards would not only fall and tumble, but burn to the ground. The anger inside was burning too, for those that had left him to deal, but also with those that were causing all his grief. If he was true to himself, the anger came from a much deeper place than a few cowards and those trying to get their friends off the hook. It had been 16 months since the death of his nephew, Matt Brad Lockhart, his sister's only child, thus his only nephew. He had never been married, never had kids of his own, so Matt was showered with his love and attention. He was only 15-year old when he was taken, a freshman in high school. He played the drums in the marching band, worked a small part-time job after school at the local bookstore stocking shelves, and overall was the apple of not only his mother's eye, but also his. The Thursday night the call came was the worst call and day of his life. She had been in tears as she tried to tell her that her Maddie was gone, literally gone. He had been seen getting into a dark-colored truck only 2 blocks from their home. His mother had had to work a little later than usual, and he had said that it would be fine if he walked a few blocks home. He had done it before, no problem, until this. The body was found only 2 hours later. The authorities surmised that he had put up such a fight that the killer or killers had abandoned him. Whatever they had planned on initially trying to do had been aborted. He had skin under his nails and bloody knuckles where he had fought to get free. While the police would not say exactly what they thought the assailants had wanted with Matt, his uncle knew. They were predators, pedophiles, the worst preying on kids. That call from his frantic sister, broken, suddenly lost, had changed him that day. He knew it was a fight he would lose, so, in retrospect, he had not fought, not very hard. More like a little pushback that was meant to do anything but allow him to tell himself that he tried. Now, today, as he waited, he also realized that this was not for Matt anymore. Matt was all about preservation. When the dark sedan passed, then another, and finally a third, he knew that was his target. It would have been a huge mistake to try to take them on this short, cross-town trip. They would have been ready. But he also was looking for a kink in the armor, something he may be able to use down the road. Anything. The following morning, 2 judges, 3 police captains, 2 retired prison guard higher-ups, and the killer were sitting around a large table in the back corner of an empty bar on the wrong side of the tracks, contemplating their next move. The killer, while the most hands-on during the whole thing, was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Over the years, he had heard about such meetings. Whispers, really. The system was always disappointing someone, somewhere. In meetings like this, they were supposed to be the answer. The method may be different, but the end result was always the same. Another evil was extracted, and a wrong by the system was corrected by groups like these. Groups that over time said enough was enough and took matters into their own hands. The killer's real name was Neil Kennedy, and he had attended his first meeting over a year and a half ago. It was a meeting for new recruits. Nothing like the table he sat at now. He had moved up the ranks. His drive and outspokenness towards the legal system and its faults, and of course his police and military training, helped him get to where he was at the table. The decisions were always a group decision, but it was beginning to seem like they had picked the wrong patsy this time, and that was on Neil. He had given them 3 names, and when they asked him his top choice, he had named Leonard Royal. for so many reasons that still would make him the top choice on anyone's list. Lucky these meetings were not about blame. They were geared more towards solutions and moving forward, learning from many mistakes, and correcting them swiftly. Gatherings like these were very important, and they did not exist for the last 100 years because those that believed were easily scared or walked away from difficult situations. On the contrary, they would face this head on, as they always had done. Chapter 31. The following morning, someone left Leonard the day's newspaper outside his door. It was open to an article on the second page, above the fold. It was not what one would call flattering towards the defendant in a serial murder case. He was grateful for the heads up before he went downstairs to start his day. He read the article twice. It was well written, but it was also clear that someone wanted everyone to know about every mistake he'd ever made. His daughter, his sympathy towards the original defender of children. It was a trial by newspaper article as far as he could tell. When he walked downstairs, the buzz that had filled the kitchen and adjacent dining room went to more of a whisper. Without thinking or hesitation, Leonard asked, "Did anyone read Garfield this morning? That crazy cat always makes me laugh." There was a simultaneous laugh, and then a buzz was back in the air. Leonard stood in line for a glass of orange juice, then made his way to the front porch for a heavy dose of Mother Nature. No one had seen Kenny or Trish since the night before. The reunion had been brief. Both seemed like they needed some alone time, so the morning meeting started without them. Things were progressing, but at this point there was nothing found that would shed light on what Tilly might have meant or known. 3 days felt like a long time, but when you have so many boxes, each with as many individual pieces of paper as there were, it was a daunting task. But everyone was keeping their optimism, at least on the surface. While work was being done downstairs, Kenny was finishing a lengthy email to Renee. He knew that she wouldn't read it for a few hours. He had too much to say in a text. An email felt right somehow. Trish was writing too, but not an email. She decided to put all her thoughts down before she started a day of digging through boxes. There was no spelling or grammar corrections, just a stream of thought, and the events of the last few days, including her feelings for her lost friend and how she felt responsible for her death. She would review her words later for help, guidance. She wasn't sure, but she did not lie to herself. She wrote the truth as she saw it. Before either could make their way downstairs, they both heard the commotion at the front door. A moment later, someone yelled up the stairs to Kenny. As he exited his room, smiled at Trish as she was also heading down the stairs, and then he was halfway down when he saw her. Her eyes must have been as wide as a plate when he saw Renee standing at the foot of the stairway, jacket and small handbag in her hand. He skipped the last 3 steps to get to her. When he went to give her a hug and a kiss, all he got in response was a pointed, "This must be your pretend wife following me down the stairs." A group of people may never have dispensed quickly, including Trish, who at this point wished she had stayed in her room another hour, 2, or 10. Kenny was taken back. This was not the Renee he had left only a few days ago. He offered to take her bag upstairs to his room, but she grabbed his arm and said, "No, I'm not staying here. I'm staying at the Embassy Suites just a few miles away. I just stopped by here first, surprise you, and ask you to come stay with me at the hotel for a few days until I have to go back for meetings." She could instantly tell this made Kenny uncomfortable. "Can you not break away from your old and new friends to spend some time with me after I changed my life all around to be here now?" He moved them over to the oversized couch and tried to explain everything as he was going along, what was happening and how he just couldn't leave all these people to do the work and him go away for a few days. Renee was on her feet, as if something lit her backside on fire. As she moved towards the door, she spun around, and in a loud enough voice everyone could hear, "I'm not sure why you're all using this energy and resources and spending all this time. Every expert I've listened to or read says the same thing. Your dear friend is a murderer." Then she was gone. Being mad about Trish and his not calling her was one thing, but this last comment, well, it was just mean. Kenny watched as her driver whipped the small black SUV around and headed away from the property. His heart was hurt. The urge to chase after her was only outweighed by the guilt he'd feel if he left the house and go enjoy himself while others tried to save his friend's life. Good and evil both increase at compound interest. This is why little decisions you and I make every day are such of infinite importance. That is a quote by C.S. Lewis, the British writer and literary scholar. Chapter 32. The time on his phone told him it was well past 11 p.m. He had called her hotel. She had not checked in yet, but they were holding a reservation. He had left messages, no reply. Texts, no reply. He was past worried, couldn't really think of anything but his last contact with her, really. The rest of the day, he had been worthless. It was apparent to everyone, including himself. Tricia had stayed clear the entire day. She didn't make it awkward, and he was thankful. He had texted Kenny and Leonard. Neither answered. It was late after all, and unlike him, they had put in a full day. All of a sudden, he needed fresh air, so he headed downstairs, grabbed a flavored water bottle, and headed to the front porch, flopped down in the most comfortable deck chair he'd ever sat in. The air calmed his nerves for the briefest of moments, but then the fears and what-ifs were back in full force. It wasn't for a couple minutes when he sensed movement, then noticed the kitchen light had been turned on. The entire side of the house was glass, so it wasn't hard to see the figure taking something out of the fridge was Trish. Opening the door, he stuck his head in. Hey. Sorry about earlier. That really wasn't like her. No apologies necessary. If my man came bouncing down the stairs with another woman, I might not act too ladylike either. You two good? No, she never checked into the hotel. No communication. Is that like her? Could she have decided to fly home? No. And maybe. Trish pulled out her phone and began to dial. What's her last name? Within 10 minutes, she verified that Renee had not changed her flight plans and was still scheduled to depart 2 days from now, heading back to Charlotte. Then, hospitals? Police stations? What? Have you called hospitals and police stations? No. Why would you say that? Trish stood up and went back inside, but before the door closed, he could hear her say, Suri, dial the New Hanover Regional Medical Center. She was right, but he didn't want to let himself think that way. Then it hit him like a brick upside the head. He had wanted to chase after her earlier because deep down he knew she may be in danger. Before he could open the door, Trish came barreling through. We have to go, now. I'll drive, just get in. They were backing out of the drive when she told him that someone fitting Renee's description was in surgery after a car accident that killed the driver. The words stuck like a knife. It was 6 hours later that Renee was brought into a recovery room. 6 hours that Kenny sat in the stillness of the room with lights out and waited, prayed, hoped, made promises to whomever may be listening. He did love Renee and wanted her safe and healthy, but he also felt an enormous weight of guilt on his chest, to the point he thought he was going to have an anxiety attack more than once in the last several hours. The bruises did nothing to take away from her beauty in her eyes. He tried to smile as she looked at him through drugged eyes. The look he got back was of someone that had been through a lot and needed to rest, so he didn't say a word, just watched as 3 nurses moved her equipment and tubes to make her as most comfortable as they could. When he watched them leave, a few minutes later, he turned to speak to Renee for the first time since their separation at the beach house. Her eyes were closed. She appeared to have fallen asleep, just that fast. Selfishly, he wanted her to wake up so he could get some things off his chest, but he resisted, took her hand, adjusted his seat, and tried to clear his head so that he might get a few minutes of peace. Since the call that started all this, he could not remember a minute's peace. A little past 2 hours, he could feel her hand pull away from his. Now they were looking at each other directly in the eyes, and Kenny didn't have a word to say. He could tell she had been crying. It broke his heart even more. Kenny returned to the beach house by lunchtime. He had been picked up and dropped off by a security team. Precautions were being taken as much as possible. There was a detail outside the hospital recovery room as well. Everyone wondered why he was back, but no one was going to ask. Kenny was not really ready to talk. He headed straight to his room without a word. Renee had asked him to be honest with her and himself, and he promised he would. Had it upset him that a pretty girl pretended to be his wife when he was engaged to her? No. Why wasn't she the first one notified when he was injured? Shouldn't she have been, since she was his fiancée? What if he had died without them being able to say their final words to each other? I don't know. Yes, but I didn't. He noticed that the word was had been used, but he didn't question it at this point. Then she asked, the accident, was it related to the case he was working on? Probably. Then she had asked him to go and let her rest. Her final statement was, I'll call you if I need anything. Please respect my space. And he would. Chapter 33. Remy had asked to meet with Leonard, Kenny, and Sean. The trio had no idea what was up, but Leonard was hoping that the brainy attorney had found something. He could not have been further from the truth. Remy had to leave. Wasn't sure if he'd return, and if he did, he wasn't sure when it would be. He would leave his assistant and help recommend another defense attorney, but his mind was set, and he'd be gone before lunch. The story was brief, without little information and loads of speculation. Remy stated that his wife was not well and needed to be home with her. They were going out of the country for a while, so she could see some distant relatives, get some fresh air, and relax. No telling of what she was sick from, where they were going, or for how long. Nothing. He had just walked out of the room with his eyes staring at his shoeless feet. That was odd, right? Leonard asked after the initial shock wore off. If either of his friends heard him, they didn't answer. Sean had returned a call from the office, and Kenny had other things on his mind. The work was tedious at this point, reviewing old files, going through box after box that they had to replace after the fire, looking for anything that could help the cause. Some wanted to work outside, but it was deemed a bad idea, and a risk with those that wanted to wish them harm. Spence was in maybe his sixth box that he had been going through the last couple of days when he came upon something. He spent better part of 2 hours checking, rechecking, and then checking again. He certainly didn't want to bring this to anyone's attention, get anyone's hopes up, unless he was sure. At some point, he decided there was no way this wasn't important, so he asked to meet with Sean. Sean always made people feel like they were the most important person in the world when they were speaking, and this time, he had something to tell. He was nervous, but excited to show Sean what he had found. When he was done, the once detective stood up, stretched, took the copies Spence had made for him, shook his hand, and then asked him not to say anything to anyone until everything was verified. Then he was gone. When he was outside, Sean threw up his left hand in the air. He did not want to show it, but he was so frickin' happy at the moment. This could be just what they were looking for. He needed to sit down with Leonard and one of the legal assistants as soon as possible. Her name was Bray Lee, but her friends and coworkers called her B. Lee. She was curious what was happening when Sean asked her to bring a recording device, notepad, and her open mind to the closed-in back porch area. She was excited to get away from the pile of court documents that waited for her. She and Sean sat in silence until Leonard walked in and took a seat across from B. Lee. Chapter 34. It had been just after midnight when Drexel Woodstone pulled his medium-sized SUV into the parking space in front of his first-floor apartment. When he worked, he was on the second shift at the local poultry plant, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. He was scheduled 5 to 6 days a week. They were lucky if they saw him 3 on average. Drexel was the son of the day shift manager, so there was little chance he would lose his job, and he had found that 3 to 4 days a week would cover his small bills and leave him with some beer and fun money. When he needed food or supplies for the apartment, he would make that loving trip to see his dad. When he wasn't working, and even sometimes when he was, the 20-something liked to spend his time on the internet. He followed numerous groups on Facebook, X, and others. He had also, unfortunately for everyone, stumbled upon a few sites that a good son would not venture towards. But the addiction had come at him like a runaway train. Now he spent hours on mainly 3 sites, one more disturbing than the other. His family had influenced in the community, had lived on Eagles Island for generations, and had still owned numerous businesses in the area and gave handsomely to the local Catholic Church and police fund each year. True or not, many felt that fact played a part in his always seemed to avoid serious trouble. The rumors were vast and disturbing, and the killer had known that 99% of at least most of them were true. Parents that had come forward with complaints regarding inappropriate interactions between Drexel and their children they would recant, decide not to pursue legal action, or a few times even moved away, never to be heard of again. For those reasons, he had been number 8. When he was found, he was in his shower, badly beaten with a single note in his mouth. Water was running. His eyes were wide with fear. The newspaper had written such a lovely story about a youth taken too soon, while the killer knew the world was a better place without this predator. But the killer would, if asked, say this killing was not eventful in the least. Everything had gone as planned. He would be terribly wrong. The date of the Woodstone murder was April 22nd, which happened to be an important date for at least one other reason. It was the day Leonard was admitted to the hospital due to complications of COVID. According to his hospital records, he had been admitted at exactly 8:20 and had not been released until the next day at 3 p.m. Drexel Woodstone's body had been found by the apartment complex manager at 12:45 a.m. on the morning of the 25th, and the coroner's report? Well, it stated clearly the man had been dead for at least an hour. So the question now? How could Leonard be at the hospital sick with COVID and killing a man on the other side of town at the exact same time? Sean sat, fidgety in his seat, while he listened to B. Lee ask the questions he had written for her. It was established on the recording before the first question that neither had seen the questions before entering the room. No discussion had been had, and then Leonard answered the questions. After Sean told Leonard and B why the questions were asked and what Spencer had found, Leonard had stood up, but had to be helped back into the chair when Sean was done explaining. Chapter 35. 5 minutes after the new information was faxed to the district attorney's office, the killer was informed of the newest obstacle. He was also told that the fax had been intercepted and wouldn't be destroyed, giving them a sliver of time to make something happen. It was strongly suggested that the time be used wisely. Neil had a plan, risky, but there was an above-average chance it would work, and if it did, the potential of eliminating all of their problems. It would take some doing, but nothing that couldn't be done and hadn't been done before. The assistant to the district attorney, ADA, Brett Knowles, had his position for 3 years and was well liked by those in the judicial system. His private life was private, but Neil knew he had been married for 11 years to his high school sweetheart, had 3 children, 1 boy, 2 girls, lived in a modest home in one of the best communities in the area with water access, worked too much, and he wasn't at work or at home. He was at his girlfriend's place. That was a townhome that was located only 5 minutes from his family's house. He would be the key player in this move. Within a short time of taking the call, 2 men were heading downtown to speak in private with Mr. Knowles. 2 days after the meeting, a certified envelope was delivered to Sean at the beach house. Enclosed was the following letter. Dear Mr. Trammell and Associates, I would like to meet with you and your team at your earliest convenience to discuss the matter at hand. It appears to me we need to correct an erroneous mistake. My confidence level in the fact that there may not be one or more within the walls of Justice Building that would like to see this go away is low. With that being said, I would like to suggest we meet at my home on the Cape Fear River. The details can be worked out, but I would look forward to hearing you all have accepted my invitation. Please only call the number provided from the phone enclosed. I look forward to speaking with you soon. Brett Knowles, ADA. Short and to the point. Within 10 minutes, everyone in the large game room listened to Sean read the letter. Within 5 minutes after that, Sean was dialing the number provided and setting up the meeting for the next day. 2 minutes after that, the phone call ended. Neil was getting the good news. The trap was set, and the ordeal would soon be over. Chapter 36. Brett Knowles had not gotten to where he was by being naive. He knew the type of men that had called him asking for a favor, with a not-so-subtle threat to his family, if he didn't do as asked. But this is why Family Suburban was heading west out of town on 74, traveling towards Columbia, South Carolina. The family knew no one in the area. The tracking device had been disabled on the vehicle, and until he had the confirmation this mess was over, he and his family would be on an extended vacation. No one knew where they were going, including his kids and wife. Cash would be used for everything, and all phones had been turned off and put safely in the center console. Brett's top priority? Keeping his family safe. He had not always been the best father, husband, son, brother. Well, he just hadn't been always the best version of himself. That had all changed last year when his wife, Samantha, was in a horrible bike accident as she trained for a fundraiser she was planning to do. It was going to be along 31 between North Myrtle Beach and Myrtle Beach the following month. Sam, as her family and friends called her, was almost home when a delivery driver took his eyes off the road for only a second and hit her back tire. She had been in the hospital for nearly a week, and during that time, Brett spent every second he could thanking whoever would listen in the heavens for his wife and vowing to be better if she could just come home to them. At the end of the week, she was wheelchaired out to the Suburban looking as lovely as always. Makeup had been used to cover her facial bruisings, and the long dress covered the other outward bruising. It was the internal issues that the doctors wanted to make sure they took serious, and to make sure that she took her medication and stayed off her feet for a while. Brett and the kids made sure she lifted nothing heavier than a water bottle and needed nothing during that time. He had received an enormous blessing, so he was trying very hard to live up to his end of the bargain. The kids were asleep, Sam was close, and the traffic was light as the miles and time ticked by. He wanted to stay in a family-type roadside motel where cash would not be a problem, but he also wanted the security of a full-service hotel. He had not made up his mind which would be best. Instead, he took advantage of the silence and thought about what else he could do to ensure his family's safety. He could not think of anything at the moment. When Sean Trammell had called, he was not surprised. The man had been through a lot and was looking for a way out. He had given him the address to the gated home. They had discussed the time, how many would be coming, and any dietary requirements as lunch would be served for his guests. Then the phone call ended, and right then Brent knew he was sending the group of 17 to their deaths. But what could he have done? If he had refused or went to the authorities, what would have happened to his family? What would that have accomplished? His family may have already been taken or dead, and the culprits would still be in the wind. He could not risk his family for anything. It had been part of his promise, hadn't it? Regarding the hotel, his decision was made for him when he spotted the sign for the pet-friendly Holiday Inn Express only 2 exits away. His mind and eyes were heavy, and his back was not happy with the long ride. As he pulled into the parking lot, everyone began to stir. The rooms were adjoining, kids and pets in one, he and his wife in the other. Brett had learned a long time ago it was the only way to do it, if at all possible. Double the space, double the bathrooms, and when you needed privacy for mom and dad, it was available. It was the following morning. The parents had slept in, which was not part of their normal routine, but it was welcomed. As they lay in bed listening for sounds from the other room, Brett put his arm around Sam. She whispered, "Are you going to tell me what's going on? And don't say nothing. It's written all over your face." The couple had been together long enough for him to know that he couldn't try to lie or make something up. She would call foul before he could finish his thought. So, after a moment of hesitation and a little more badgering, he told her, making sure she understood right up front he was doing what he thought was best for his family. When he was done, she rolled up on her elbow, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "You need to fix this." In his head, he replied with this outside voice, "Have you not listened to what I said? These men are killers." Out loud, he said, "Sam, what can I do?" She moved in closer, closed her eyes, and adjusted though she was right up next to his ear. How can our family flourish moving forward if we know it's built on the lives of others? The Knowles family were just pulling out of the hotel parking lot. They had a leisurely morning, taking care of themselves and the dogs before getting back on the road. They were not far from Columbia, and they were in no hurry and had no plans for the rest of the day. Brett was trying to avoid the stare that he knew he was getting from his wife. If she'd asked him once, she had asked him half a dozen times if he had called the detective yet. He had not, and was tired of answering the question she knew the answer to. They both knew if he didn't call within the next few minutes, it would be too late. The idea of putting his family in more danger after all he had done to keep them safe and get them out of town, the lies, the canceling of very important meetings, disappointing his superiors with last-minute departure. Now she wanted him to warn a detective, knowing that the killers would know that it had to be him that warned them. How did that make any kind of sense? When she spoke, it startled him out of his thoughts. Aren't we headed the wrong way? He saw the sign. Yes, they were heading the wrong way. Maybe in more ways than one, he thought. Chapter 37. When the phone rang, Sean almost didn't answer it. There was a lot going on. Everyone getting ready to get loaded in vans, security detail giving final instructions, address loaded into the GPS. Who had the file for the ADA? Was everything in it? It was certainly a team effort, but someone had decided Sean was the go-to guy for every question, big and small. When it began to ring again, he took the time to answer, in not the most pleasant tone, when he regretted it as soon as he picked up the line and heard Brett's voice. He stepped to the back of the last van so he could hear better, and took in every word. A half hour later, the vans pulled up to the gate, 5 total. Before they even completed stops, the large iron gates began to swing in. The van slowly entered the manicured property. The house sat in the back of what must be at least 5 acres, with a pond in the front, beautiful flowers, bushes, and trees. There were 2 shiny sedans directly in front of the home, so the vans pulled in behind them. There appeared to be no movement outside of the house. The doors on all 5 vehicles seemed to open simultaneously. Exiting were men and women who appeared to be ready for a working lunch, where they would prove their case against the evil that had been done to Leonard and the evil that was also chasing them. As soon as everyone was out in the open, the French doors at the front of the home opened. Out walked a well-dressed man in his mid-60s. With a smile, he extended his hand and walked directly towards Sean. "Hi, I'm Neil Kennedy. I know you're expecting to meet Mr. Knowles, but unfortunately, he is on his way to Columbia, South Carolina. We do not expect him to return anytime soon. Please understand, before you speak, protest, or whatever else you think you may want to do. The grounds are crawling with my men. If one of you even thinks about scratching your nose, it may cost you your hand. Are we clear?" Then the smile was back, a smile of a man in control. Sean, Kenny, and Leonard, and Trish were escorted into the main home, while everyone else went to a small cottage with 4 guards in tow. Within the formal sitting room, the 4 sat down on a very uncomfortable couch, guards posted on each side, and Neil across from them in an oversized recliner. It was clear he was the cat, and they were all canaries, and he was going to enjoy every minute. After all, hadn't he earned it with all he had been through? He first commended them on finding the date and time discrepancy, then talked briefly about their luck and how it had run its course. Then he went through the entire scheme from top to bottom, right up until this moment, when he would begin a call verifying that the Kennedy family had had a very unfortunate accident on their way to a spontaneous family vacation. When he was done, Sean, to everyone's surprise, stood and stretched, with guns pointed at his chest. He then spoke into his watch. "Did we get all that?" Neil was entertained. "That is good, detective, or whatever you call yourself these days, but we are not going to fall for that amateur trick." "Tricks?" Sean said flatly. "Let's just see. Try calling your men with the others. Then if you're not satisfied by calling them, call the team that was supposed to hit the Kennedys. I think you'll find they're all busy at the moment and won't be taking their calls." Neil never took his eyes off Sean, nodded to one of the men. They all waited to hear if anyone answered on the other line. First call, no answer. Second, same. Third, same. Neil was clearly frustrated and stormed over to the main window of the home. He could see nothing, but he knew if Sean was telling the truth, they were out there, just waiting to see his play. When he swung around to ask what was keeping him from killing them, he saw the answer. His men were now sitting on the couch with guns to their backs, and now it was his 4 guests that were smiling. "I think enough lives have been lost. Let's stop it now," is all Sean could think to say as he moved to Neil and put him in cuffs. Chapter 38. The Kennedy family had been moved to a safe house just outside of Orlando, Florida, for the time being. There were still too many questions to feel comfortable bringing them back to North Carolina. The same was true for the relatives and loved ones of the group that had gone up against the killers. Kenny was worried about Renee. She had been released from the hospital, sent him a short text letting him know that and the fact she needed some time and would be out of touch for a while. He had replied, but she had not read the message. Should he have lied? Time would tell. The men taken into custody were not talking. The best interrogators in the country had been brought in, and there was no cracking them. They were professionals, as Neil had reminded himself during the ordeal. None of the men knew about the few that sat around the table and pulled the strings, and he would not talk, so each of them had moved back further into the shadows. Strings would be pulled, and he would not serve hard time, might not even a long time depending on the strings, but he was prepared for whatever was to come. His mother would be taken well care of, and he would need for nothing while behind bars. That was one thing the group would make sure of. Remy had made an appearance, which was appreciated. He talked to everyone as a group and individually, so they would know all their legal rights at this point and answered each and every one of their questions. The story was broke by an independent up-and-coming writer that only signed her article by Trish. All others were left trying to catch up after the article released. 2 nights after the events with Neil, the entire group met at a local bar where Kenny and Sean rented a side room for the festivities. It was a time to reflect on those lost during the ordeal, but also celebrate the fact that Leonard was cleared of all charges and even given a public apology by local and state officials. Jill had flown in as soon as Sean had told her about the news. He now watched her as she played matchmaker for Kenny and Trish. She had never really liked Renee and was taking the time 2 changed the landscape. While he watched her, Leonard slid next to him at the bar. "Thank you for all you did for me, believe in me and all." Sean didn't take his eyes off his wife, but asked his friend, "Are you going to try to change some things in your life after all this?" Leonard, without a beat, said, "Not anytime soon." Well, there's the conclusion of our journey. I hope you've enjoyed listening as much as I've enjoyed putting it all together for you. Now I know I've left some loose ends, some questions you may like to have answered. I understand. There's a reason for that. I'm happy to say our trio, Sean, Kenny, and Leonard, will be important in our next journey. The journey will enlighten us in some ways and hopefully lead us to another fun adventure where along the way, 2 of the friends will have to risk their lives to keep the other from a killer, dead set on revenge. This will not be a sequel to Defender of Children or Push to Death, but a new tale with new characters, maybe a few old ones, but new situations and a realization about one of our detectives' past that will cause us to think about what we think about him. No working title as of yet, but hopefully we'll have one before the journey begins. Thank you again for all your support. I really appreciate each and every one that takes the time to listen during their busy lives and spend a little time with me and our journeys. Thank you and have a great day.